Hi and welcome to another screencast in the Creating Sample Sets for GrandOrgue series. This time I will be using LoopAuditioneer to prepare the samples that we cut out for usage in GrandOrgue, and this will include, among other things, fading, adding loop and cue markers, perhaps adding pitch information where necessary. But the samples are a bit different depending on their type and needs different treatment. So, before we dive in, let's clarify one thing. I am working on copies always. So, from the first recorded files, I use copies to do noise reduction, and from the noise reduction to cut out the samples into the files. And then I'm not processing the cut samples, but a copy of them, so that if something goes wrong in this process, for whatever reason, I can go back to something that is usable without having to retrace my steps too much. So that is a really important thing to keep in mind. So now for the samples, if we start with the noise samples, we can start with the blower noise, for instance, here. So I select the directory that I'm going to work with, like so, and then I have a list of the files, and in this case there is only one, so I can just open that file. I will add a cue marker where this file is supposed to end if turned off, and I can listen to this by selecting that cue and pressing space or this icon in the toolbar or the transport, but the space is a convenient keyboard shortcut. So there the blower was turned off and then is slowly faded away. So now I want to add a loop somewhere here. So I will search for loops. I have set the sustain section like this. This is the gray area that I'm going to search for loops in. So I could click on this toolbar icon or use the tool menu and select auto loop to auto search, or I could have used the keyboard shortcuts once again. And then I have some examples of loops, and I will listen to them by selecting the loop and hitting space. Okay, so there is a bubble somewhere around here and one little noise here and another here. But in the main picture I don't think that will matter too much, so I will keep this longest loop. And perhaps I should listen to this one too. There is something happening right at the start here. So perhaps I won't keep that, but only the first loop. So I can just deselect these by clicking on them, or I can move with the keys to the correct one and then deselect it with keyboard keys too to avoid clicking with the right hand and get some kind of cramp in my mouse hand, because this kind of processing is kind of tedious and repetitive. So anything I can do with keys, I will instead. So now I save this, Control S, or I could have used the toolbar icon or file menu, but this is it. So now we could do it like this instead. So the key noises are placed, if we have a look, we can take the XY this time. The key noise have attacks here and releases here. So I could use a batch feature because the key noises only needs to be faded. So I will select pipes, XY, no, actually not pipes, I will say select noises, XY, key noise. And then I have a subdirectory here, and by selecting process recursively, I will affect that subfolder too. So if I, for instance, don't take these numbers as an absolute, they work in my case, you will have to experiment with what is necessary for your samples. So I will fade in with 5 milliseconds and fade out with 500 from the end. So I click OK, and then we can see that both the attacks and the releases are now processed like that. And we will see later how this is used. So for now, I will perhaps move to the normal samples. Let's say we take not the noises, but pipes, and we take the AB. So in these folders, we have each stop is having one directory, and then in them we have 2 release directories, and I will treat these a little bit differently. So I cannot really use this recursive option anymore, but we select, for instance, the AB pipe. I can start with let's say the get act first, and I take a release, and the only thing I will do with this release is to fade it out, and I will fade it out at 600 milliseconds from the end. I start the fade. This again works with my samples. You might need to test what is suitable for your situation. So I click OK, and that is done. And then I change folder to the second release folder. Do the same, but change this now to 300 instead, like so. And then I finally take the main stop folder, and here I will do like this, fade it in with 5 milliseconds and then fade it out 150, like so. Next off, I will store the pitch info, and in this case I take the FFT. I'm not sure if that will be the best, but I will start with that anyway for now. So I run the batch like that, and then I auto add a release queue. And here we might have an issue actually. So I will exit the batch mode for now and go back to the settings. And here we see that now we have a manual selection of the sustain section. So I will tick the auto search instead for the batch processing. So the same is actually used in the batch. So we return to the batch and we have this selected already correctly. I will auto search for loops like that. No batch processing, and we run it. And some loops seems to have been found. So now I change to that directory that I was working on. And it's here, pipes, AB, gedact, like that. And I seem to have forgotten to add the release queue. So I can do that in batch like this. Auto add release queue, run it, exit, and now they are here. So these are not perfect in any way. So I will need to check them and possibly adjust to be exactly like I want to. So to review the view loops, I select one and click spacebar. So this loop would otherwise have been quite good, but there is a very audible click here, which means that I will untick this loop and move to the next instead. That is pretty okay. This works. Okay, so a little noise here, but that is not so terrible. But I will remove that since it's so close to... So that is that. So I will save that with Control Alt and S to save it, and at the same time move to the next file and open it like so. And I check the release that it's okay, and then I start to review the loops. Seems to be okay. Here we have a click. So there are a few options. I could just untick it. I could, since this is the last loop, I could try to save it by crossfading it, or I could try to edit it. So I will bring up the loop point overlay view by, I could right click on the loop like this and select view loop points, or I could use the tools or a keyboard shortcut for that. So in the middle of this window is where the loop is happening. And while it's quite good, it is not perfect. You can see that there is some differences in the loop, actually. They would probably align better like this, but then we don't have a perfect loop point anymore. But overall, they seem to be perhaps something like this. But we will have an audible click in the left channel right now if I save the changes. So there is a very audible click. So in this case I would probably just remove this and go on with the next file. But it is possible to apply a crossfade too. So like this, I can select linear and, for instance, 50 milliseconds crossfade, or make it smaller if possible. And this changes the waveform. So this is kind of a destructive method, but now we have a perfect loop here. So that could be done. Otherwise, if I want to undo everything I have done, I can just open the file again. So I will use, so it is easier for you to see open file here. And then I have all these. Actually, there was a click already here. So, like that, and then move on to the next. So in this case, all of the loops are okay, but we have a very audible bubble here. So at this point I will save the longest loop and remove all of the others. And I save it like this, and then I will readjust the sustain section to manual selection, and I will add a more forward, I think it was here somewhere, search more forward. So the longest loop I will prioritize as an alternative that doesn't have the bubble there. So I will save this. And I will save that. And that is enough for this, actually, so I will go on. Okay, so I will save two loops here, just because one is without a bubble and the other is kind of the longest, that is really not the longest actually, but the one furthest back. So that will be fine for that. There is a click. But the other seems to be okay. So I could also, we can check this. I will adjust the release queue. I click on it and just click on the new position I want to have it on. And then I will add a new loop manually with Control and N, or with this. Like so. And this might not be perfect at all. So it is a very audible click. So I bring up the overlay to check it. And we see that it doesn't align at all. So I will move the waveform so that it approximately aligns. This is to get the kind of phase as good as possible. One could also see if I get a better match somewhere a little bit later, like this. I save it. And we have it now here. It might not sound perfect now. But it's pretty good. Even if there is a little bit of a click here, but I actually think that is coming here. So perhaps we could do it like this instead. I will just save the second loop and then I will make it shorter, somewhere around here. And I have a look at it. And it seems to be pretty okay aligned, but there is a click. So I could try, just for showing you, to save this with a crossfade. And then I would kind of save this first before I do the crossfade. Then select the loop I want to crossfade. Add a short crossfade like this. And finally there is a kind of noise here. And it's also audible here. So this is kind of where the trial and error comes in. So I will actually open the file again and remove this loop and kind of test something like this, perhaps. And we'll see if the next one matches better. It does not. Really? So we can try like this. I save it and then select the second loop and apply a crossfade to it. And checking the first loop again. Yeah, that kind of works. Yeah, so all of these are okay, so I will save them and continue. So all of these are okay, but this release might be a little bit early, so I move it slightly more far away, and I will do the same here. And then I start to listen to the loops. Okay. So I will adjust the cue like so, and I will save and then search for another loop in, yeah, maybe around here. So I will leave this with the bubble in and have another here that is without the bubble, so there will be some variations for that. So I'll save that, and now this should be okay. I can see here, for instance, that this is a few pitch information that is off, obviously. This cannot be correct. So I will open these files and have a look at it. And in this case, I think I will use the time domain pitch instead. So I will store that like so, save it. And now I see that they match better, but this one is off. So this is perhaps the best still. But it's not great. So I might go back here and have a look into the spectral view of it and manually select the pitch like this. That one I believe more in. So we leave it at that for this stop. And this is basically all there is to do. Just repeat it and check the loops, add all the necessary information, and if they are kind of noises, I don't need the pitch info because these will be told to be without pitch later, so the GrandOrgue won't try to repitch them. So that is it for this screencast. Thank you for watching and see you in future screencasts. Bye.